I stepped out my front door that Tuesday morning, keys jingling in my weathered hands, ready for my weekly grocery run. The autumn air in Melbourne was crisp, and I was looking forward to driving past the park where the jacaranda trees were blooming purple. But when I reached my driveway, my heart stopped. My little blue Honda was gone. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 65 years old, and until 3 days ago, I thought I knew my son. I stood there for a full minute, blinking at the empty concrete, wondering if I was losing my mind. Had I forgotten where I parked? I'd been driving that car for 8 years without a single accident. It was my independence, my connection to the world outside these walls. Then I heard David's voice behind me. "Mum? We need to talk." I turned to see my son walking up the driveway, his face wearing that expression I'd learned to dread, the one that meant he was about to tell me something for my own good. In his hands were papers, official-looking documents that made my stomach twist. "Where's my car, David?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I sold it, Mum. Yesterday." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You what?" "You're too old to be driving," he said, the words tumbling out rehearsed and hollow. "It's not safe anymore. You could hurt yourself, or someone else. I was looking out for you." I'm Susan, and if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. I would love to know where you're watching this from. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every day I'm bringing you stories of women who turn their deepest pain into a new good way of living their lives. Too old. At 65. The same age I'd been when I started volunteering at the community center, when I'd learned to use a computer, when I'd finally started living for myself after 40 years of living for everyone else. "Where's the money?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. David's face flushed red, and for the first time in years, he looked like the little boy who used to hide behind my skirt when he'd broken something. "What money?" "From selling my car, David." "Where is it?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. And in that silence, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my son, everything I'd sacrificed for, everything I'd believed in, was about to crumble. David shifted on his feet, those papers crumpling in his nervous hands. "The money is... It's been taken care of, Mum. You don't need to worry about it." Taken care of. As if my independence, my freedom, was just another bill to be paid and filed away. I walked past him into my house, my legs feeling unsteady. The smell of the lemon cake I'd baked yesterday still lingered in the air, a cake I'd made because David was supposed to visit for dinner. A cake that now sat untouched on my kitchen counter, just like so many others over the years. How did we get here? When did my boy, the child I'd held through countless fevered nights, the teenager I'd worked double shifts to put through university, become a stranger who could steal from me with such calculated coldness? I settled into my faded armchair, the one Bill had bought me 30 years ago when money was tight but love was abundant. The cushions still held the shape of all those nights I'd spent there, mending David's school uniforms by lamplight after my 12-hour shifts at the hospital. My fingers were arthritic now, but they remembered every stitch, every patch, every small sacrifice that had added up to a lifetime of giving. After Bill died of cancer when David was only 15, I'd become everything: mother, father, provider, protector. The insurance money barely covered the funeral expenses, and suddenly I was a widow with a grieving teenager and a mortgage that seemed impossible to manage on a nurse's salary alone. I took on extra shifts, weekend work, holiday cover. While other mothers were attending school plays and sports days, I was changing bedpans and comforting dying patients. Also, David could have his football boots, his graduation suit, his university fees. I remember ironing his first job interview shirt at 2 a.m, my eyes burning with exhaustion, but my heart full of pride for the man he was becoming. Or who I thought he was becoming. David had always been my sensitive child, the one who'd bring me dandelions from the garden and promise to look after me when I got old. "Don't worry, Mummy," he'd say with his gap-toothed grin, "I'll always take care of you." Those words had sustained me through the loneliest nights, through the aching back and swollen feet, through the years when I forgot what it felt like to live for myself. When he graduated with his business degree, a degree I'd paid for with overtime and sacrifice, I was the proudest mother in that auditorium. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I'd been saving for special occasions, and I cried as he walked across that stage. "This is for you, Mum," he'd said later, hugging me tight. "Everything I achieve is because of what you gave me." But somewhere along the way, the promises had faded. It started small. Forgotten birthday calls that became "Sorry, Mum, work was crazy." Cancelled dinners that became "We'll reschedule soon, I promise." The space between his visits grew longer, the conversations shorter. When he started dating Jessica 2 years ago, the changes became more pronounced. Jessica. Even her name left a bitter taste in my mouth now. She was everything I wasn't: young, polished, expensive. The first time David brought her to dinner, she'd walked through my home like she was surveying a museum piece, her manicured fingers trailing over my grandmother's china with barely concealed disdain. She'd complimented my quaint little cottage, in a voice that made it sound like a poverty exhibit. But I tried. Oh, how I tried to welcome her. I'd cooked her favorite meals, bought her thoughtful gifts, even endured her subtle criticisms of my furniture, my clothes, my outdated ways of doing things. When she mentioned needing money for a new car, I'd offered to help. When she complained about their apartment deposit, I'd quietly transferred money to David's account. Because that's what mothers do. We give and we give and we give, even when it leaves us empty. The signs had been there for months. Money missing from my savings account, with David's explanations growing more vague each time. My jewelry box looking somehow lighter, though I couldn't prove anything was gone. Bills that David had insisted on helping me manage, though I'd been handling my own finances perfectly well for decades. I'd dismissed my neighbor Helen's concerns when she'd mentioned seeing David at my house on days when I wasn't home. "He has a spare key for emergencies," I told her, though something in her expression had made my stomach twist with unease. Even when Jessica had started making comments about how I was getting on, and might need looking after, I'd chosen to see concern instead of calculation. When she'd suggested that driving might be becoming dangerous for someone my age, I'd laughed it off. After all, I'd been driving for 47 years without so much as a parking ticket. But sitting there now, in the aftermath of David's betrayal, all those little moments crystallized into a devastating truth. They hadn't been protecting me. They'd been positioning me. The knock at my door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Through the frosted glass, I could see Helen's familiar silhouette, and I felt a rush of gratitude for her friendship. In a world where my own son could betray me so completely, at least I still had one person who genuinely cared. But as I stood to answer the door, my legs trembling with the weight of this new reality, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. If David could sell my car behind my back, if he could look me in the eye and lie about the money, what else was he capable of? What else had he already done? The foundation of trust I'd built my entire life upon had crumbled in the space of a morning conversation. And as Helen's concerned face appeared in my doorway, I realized that the woman who'd spent a lifetime protecting others was going to have to learn, at 65, how to protect herself. From her own child. Helen stepped into my living room, her sharp gray eyes immediately reading the devastation on my face. She'd been my neighbor for 12 years, ever since her husband passed and she'd moved into the little cottage next door. If anyone understood the ache of betrayal, it was Helen. "What's happened, love?" she asked, settling beside me on the sofa with the careful grace of someone who'd learned that terrible news required gentle handling. I told her everything. About the missing car, David's rehearsed explanations, the way he'd avoided my eyes when I asked about the money. Helen listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. "That boy," she muttered, shaking her head. "I had my suspicions, but I hoped I was wrong." "Suspicions about what?" Helen hesitated, wringing her hands. "I've seen him here several times when you were at the community center. Always with that girl of his. And they weren't just visiting Maggie. They were going through things." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, going through things?" "Last month, I saw them loading boxes into David's car. When I asked you about it later, you had no idea what I was talking about." Helen's voice grew gentler. "I started keeping track after that. They've been here at least 6 times in the past 2 months, always when you were out." The room began to spin. I gripped the arm of my chair, trying to process what she was telling me. They were stealing from me? I think we need to check, love. Properly check. We started with my jewelry box. My mother's pearls were gone. The sapphire earrings Bill had given me for our silver anniversary, gone. The small diamond bracelet I'd planned to leave to David's future daughter, gone. In their place were cheap imitations, hoping I wouldn't notice the difference. "Oh, Maggie," Helen whispered, holding up a fake pearl necklace that looked nothing like my mother's treasured heirloom. But the jewelry was just the beginning. My bank statements revealed a pattern of withdrawals I hadn't made, transfers I hadn't authorized. David had been systematically draining my accounts for months, small amounts at first, then larger and larger sums. The car sale wasn't a sudden decision born of concern. It was the culmination of a long-term plan. "We need to call the police," Helen said, her voice trembling with rage. But I couldn't move. I sat there, staring at the statements, at the evidence of my son's methodical betrayal. Every withdrawal had a date. I could trace them back, remember what I'd been doing while he was stealing from me. Volunteering at the food bank. Visiting Mrs. Chun at the nursing home. Living my life, trusting my child, while he systematically destroyed my security. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories from powerful women that touch the heart of all of us. "There's something else," Helen said quietly. "Something I've been debating whether to tell you." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like a social media app. "I'm not usually one for this computer nonsense, but my granddaughter taught me how to use it. Said it was a good way to keep up with people." Her fingers found what she was looking for. "I've been following Jessica's account. Thought I might understand her better for your sake." She handed me the phone, and I felt the last pieces of my world crumble. There was Jessica, radiant in a flowing sundress, standing beside the Eiffel Tower. Another photo showed her clinking champagne glasses on what looked like a luxury cruise ship. A third captured her laughing in front of an Italian cathedral, designer bags scattered around her feet. But it was the captions that destroyed me. "Living my best life thanks to my generous future mother-in-law. #blessed #family love #Eurotrip. When your man's family loves you so much they insist on funding your dream vacation. #grateful #David no-show Totatreatm, 3 weeks in Europe and counting. Some people are just born to be treated like queens. #living the dream #spoiled." Each photo was a knife to my heart. There was my car money, my jewelry money, my security and independence transformed into Jessica's Instagram-worthy adventure. She was flaunting my life savings like it was pocket change, and she was doing it with cruel, calculated joy. "The photos are all from the past 3 weeks, Helen said gently. "The dates match up with when David sold your car." I scrolled further, my hands shaking. There were more photos. Jessica in designer boutiques, at expensive restaurants, posing with luxury goods that cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. And in several photos, I could see David in the background, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing as his fiancée broadcasted their theft to the world. But the final photo broke something inside me that I didn't know could still break. It showed Jessica holding up a familiar sapphire necklace, my sapphire necklace, the one Bill had saved for months to buy me, with the caption, "Early inheritance perks. Sometimes being patient with old people really pays off." #vintage #family heirlooms #waiting me game. I dropped the phone, my vision blurring with tears of rage and devastation. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had mocked me while doing it, turned my love and trust into a joke for Jessica's followers to laugh at. "Patient with old people," I whispered, the words like poison in my mouth. Helen retrieved her phone, her face pale with fury. "There's more. Love. From earlier posts." She showed me another caption from weeks ago. "Future Mil is so naive, bless her heart. David's finally learning that sometimes you have to take what you deserve instead of waiting for it. #inheritance #patience #smart moves." The cruelty of it stole my breath. They had planned this for months, maybe longer. Every dinner I'd cooked, every gift I'd given, every time I'd transferred money to help David with his unexpected expenses. It had all been part of their strategy. They had seen my love as weakness, my trust as stupidity. "She's been documenting the whole thing," Helen said, scrolling through more posts. "Look at this one from last month. teaching my man that his mom's been holding him back long enough. Time to take control of the family finances before she gambles it all away on bingo. She's been telling people you have a gambling problem, Maggie. The room felt like it was closing in on me. They hadn't just robbed me, they had assassinated my character, painted me as an irresponsible old woman who needed to be managed and controlled. Jessica had created an entire narrative that justified their theft, and David had let her do it. My phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering. But Helen nodded encouragingly, and I realized I needed to hear his voice now, needed to see if there was any trace of the boy I'd raised left in the man who'd betrayed me. Mum. His voice sounded strained, guilty. I wanted to check on you. Make sure you're adjusting to the new situation. Adjusting. As if losing my independence was like getting used to a new brand of tea. I'm fine, David, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Just curious about one thing. Where exactly did the money from my car go? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Mum, I can explain everything. But I already knew there was no explanation that could justify what they'd done. No excuse that could repair the trust they'd shattered. As I looked at Helen's determined face and felt the fire of righteous anger building in my chest, I realized something had fundamentally changed. I was done being the victim in my own life story. No, David, I said, my voice cutting through his stammering explanations. You can't explain this. Not anymore. I hung up the phone and turned to Helen, who was still scrolling through Jessica's social media posts with righteous fury burning in her eyes. We're going to need help. Professional help. Within 2 hours, Helen had arranged for us to meet with Thomas Fletcher, a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. His office in Collins Street felt like stepping into a different world, one where contracts and consequences mattered, where theft was called theft regardless of family relationships. Thomas Fletcher was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of steady demeanor that made you believe justice was actually possible. He listened without interruption as I laid out the evidence. The bank statements, the missing jewelry, Helen's testimony about the unauthorized visits, and most damning of all, Jessica's social media posts celebrating their theft. Mrs. Thompson, he said finally, leaning back in his leather chair, what we have here is clear financial elder abuse, compounded by fraud and theft. The social media evidence alone is enough to build a solid case. I don't want to destroy my son, I said quietly. But I can't let this continue. You're not destroying him, Thomas replied firmly. He destroyed himself the moment he chose to steal from you. What we're going to do is protect you and potentially save him from making an even bigger mistake. Thomas outlined our options. We could file criminal charges, pursue civil litigation to recover the stolen assets, or try a confrontational approach first. One that would give David a chance to come clean and make restitution before involving the courts. I want to face them, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. I want to look them in the eye and let them know exactly what I know. Helen squeezed my hand. Are you sure, love? It won't be easy. But I was sure. For 65 years, I'd been accommodating, understanding, making excuses for other people's bad behavior. I'd spent my life trying to keep peace, even when it meant swallowing my own dignity. Not anymore. Thomas helped us plan the confrontation carefully. David had been calling repeatedly since our interrupted conversation, growing more desperate with each voicemail. I finally texted him back, come to dinner Sunday. Bring Jessica. We need to talk about the European vacation. The 3 days between that text and Sunday dinner felt like the longest of my life. But they gave me time to prepare, to steel myself for what was coming. Helen helped me gather every piece of evidence, every bank statement, every photo from Jessica's social media account. Thomas had prepared legal documents that would give David one final chance to make things right before we proceeded with criminal charges. Sunday arrived grey and drizzly, typical Melbourne winter weather that matched my mood. I'd spent the morning cooking David's favorite meal, roast lamb with all the trimmings, the same dinner I'd made for his birthdays throughout his childhood. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was preparing a feast for the people who'd stolen my security. Helen positioned herself at her kitchen window, ready to intervene if things went badly. Thomas was on standby, his phone number programmed into both our phones. I felt like a general preparing for battle, except the enemy was my own flesh and blood. They arrived at 6:30, Jessica looking radiant in what I now recognized as a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She'd clearly spent her stolen vacation money well. David looked haggard, nervous, his eyes darting everywhere except to my face. "Mum, you look wonderful," he said, leaning in for a perfunctory kiss on my cheek. "Something smells amazing." Jessica surveyed my dining room with that familiar expression of barely concealed disdain. "Margaret, you've outdone yourself. Though I hope you haven't gone to too much trouble on our account." "No trouble at all," I replied sweetly. "Please, sit down. I have so much to tell you about what I've been up to this week." We made small talk through the first course, Jessica regaling us with carefully edited stories from their recent trip. She described the luxury hotels, the expensive restaurants, the designer shopping, all while maintaining the fiction that this had been David's generous gift to her. "You're so lucky to have such a thoughtful fiancé," I said, watching David squirm in his chair. "Not every man would spend so much on his partner." "Oh, David knows how to treat his woman right." Jessica laughed, reaching over to squeeze his hand possessively. "He understands that I have certain standards. Not everyone appreciates quality, but David does." The casual cruelty of her words, the obvious reference to my substandard life, finally broke the last of my restraint. "Speaking of quality," I said, standing to clear the main course plates, "I've been doing some interesting research this week. Helen taught me how to use Instagram." Jessica's fork clattered against her plate. David went pale. "Really, Mum?" David's voice cracked slightly. That's great. Technology can be confusing for people our age." "Your age?" Jessica laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it now. "David, your mother is hardly ancient. Though I suppose learning new things does get harder as we age." I returned from the kitchen carrying my laptop, Helen's phone, and a manila folder thick with documents. Jessica's confident smile faltered as I set them on the table. "You know what I found most interesting about Instagram?" I said conversationally. "How people share their entire lives on it. Their thoughts, their experiences, their confessions." I opened the laptop and turned it toward them. Jessica's profile filled the screen, her vacation photos displayed in all their stolen glory. "Living my best life thanks to my generous future mother-in-law," I read aloud from her first post. "That's such a lovely sentiment, Jessica. Though I don't remember being asked if I wanted to be generous." Jessica's face cycled through shock, anger, and calculation in the space of seconds. "Margaret, I can explain." "Oh, please do," I interrupted, clicking to the next photo. "This one is particularly interesting, early inheritance perks. Sometimes being patient with old people really pays off." "Tell me, Jessica, exactly how long were you planning to be patient with this old person?" David looked like he might be sick. "Mum, please let you what, David? Let you explain how you systematically stole from me for months? How you sold my car behind my back? How you turned my love for you into a joke for your girlfriend's social media followers?" I opened the manila folder and spread the bank statements across the table. These show every unauthorized withdrawal, every transfer I didn't approve. This folder contains copies of police reports for the stolen jewelry, including my mother's pearls that Jessica is wearing in this photo from Rome. Jessica's hand flew instinctively to her throat, where a string of fake pearls hung like an accusation. "And this," I said, producing Thomas Fletcher's business card, "is my lawyer's contact information. He's prepared criminal charges for financial elder abuse, fraud, and theft. The only reason you're not already under arrest is because I wanted to give you both one chance to make this right." The silence that followed was deafening. David was crying now, ugly, gasping sobs that reminded me of the little boy who used to hide under his bed after breaking something valuable. But Jessica's mask had finally slipped completely. "You manipulative old witch," she hissed, her beautiful face twisted with rage. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? David gave me that money willingly. He chose me over you because I make him happy in ways your pathetic maternal guilt never could. Jessica, shut up, David whispered frantically, but she was beyond caring about consequences now. No, I won't shut up. This dried-up old woman has been holding David back for years with her constant need for attention, her pitiful attempts to stay relevant in his life. She's lonely and bitter and jealous that her son found someone young and beautiful who actually deserves nice things. Deserves? I asked quietly, standing up slowly. You think you deserve what you stole from me? I think I deserve better than scraps from a woman who should have died with her husband and saved everyone the trouble of pretending to care about her. The words hung in the air like poison. David's face crumpled entirely, and I realized that Jessica had just revealed exactly who she was, not just to me but to him. Get out, David whispered, staring at Jessica like he was seeing her for the first time. What? Get out? He screamed, rising from his chair with tears streaming down his face. How could you? How could you say that about my mother? But as I watched my son finally see the woman he'd chosen over his own family, I realized the confrontation was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. Jessica stormed out, her designer heels clicking angrily against my wooden floors as she spat venom about lawyers and ungrateful old women. The door slammed so hard it rattled the windows, but the silence that followed felt like peace settling over my home for the first time in months. David collapsed back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. Mum, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I sat across from my son, studying the man I'd raised with such hope and love. He looked broken, finally seeing the full weight of what he'd done, what he'd allowed to happen. But sorry wasn't enough. Not anymore. David, I said quietly, do you understand what financial elder abuse means? He looked up, his eyes red and swollen. Mum, please. It means up to 7 years in prison. It means your career, your reputation, your future, all gone. Thomas explained the law to me very clearly. The blood drained from his face. You're going to press charges? I reached across the table and touched his hand, feeling how it trembled under mine. That depends entirely on you. Over the next hour, the full truth emerged. Jessica had been pressuring him for months, threatening to leave if he didn't provide the lifestyle she demanded. She'd convinced him that I was hoarding money that rightfully belonged to him, that my age made me incapable of managing my own affairs responsibly. She said you'd never even notice the small amounts, David whispered. She said you were getting confused anyway, that we were protecting you from making mistakes. And the car. She needed money for the trip. Said it was our engagement celebration, that you'd want us to be happy. His voice cracked. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared of losing her. She made me feel like I was nothing without her. I understood then that my son had been a victim too, in his own way. Jessica had seen his weakness, his desperate need for validation, and she'd weaponized it against both of us. But understanding didn't excuse what he'd done. Thomas Fletcher arrived an hour later, briefcase in hand and grim determination on his face. I'd called him after Jessica's dramatic exit, knowing we needed to formalize whatever came next. Mrs. Thompson, he said, settling into my living room with professional calm, I've prepared several documents based on our earlier conversation. David's face went ashen as Thomas laid out the options. Criminal charges. That could result in imprisonment. Civil suits that could destroy his financial future. Public exposure that would end his career in finance. However, Thomas continued, your mother has proposed an alternative. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of this moment. David, you're going to make full restitution. Every penny, every piece of jewelry, every cent of interest or fees. You're going to work with Thomas to set up a legal framework that protects my assets from any future misunderstandings. Of course, yes, anything. I'm not finished. My voice carried the authority I'd never used with him before. You're also going to attend counseling to understand how you became someone who could steal from his own mother. And you're going to volunteer at the Elder Abuse Prevention Center for 6 months, so you can see firsthand the damage that people like you cause. David nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. But most importantly, I continued, You're going to earn back my trust. Not demand it, not expect it because you're my son, earn it. Through actions, not words. Thomas handed David a thick contract. This agreement outlines full restitution, establishes protective legal frameworks, and includes consequences if any terms are violated. Sign it, and we avoid criminal prosecution. Violate it in any way, and the charges will be filed immediately. David signed without reading, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. 3 months later, I was driving my replacement car, a newer Honda that David had purchased as part of his restitution, to my weekly volunteer shift at the community center. My bank accounts were restored, my jewelry returned, my sense of security slowly healing. Jessica had disappeared from our lives as quickly as she'd entered, moving on to her next victim within weeks of our confrontation. The last I'd heard, she was engaged to a wealthy widower in Sydney, already posting photos of their expensive lifestyle on social media. David came to dinner every Sunday now, but the relationship was different. He listened more, assumed less. He'd enrolled in therapy and started his volunteer work at the Elder Abuse Center, where he'd met other families torn apart by financial manipulation and greed. I used to think I was protecting her, he told me one evening, referring to Jessica. But she was the one who needed protecting from me, from what I was willing to do for her approval. As I watched him slowly rebuilding his character, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't protecting someone from consequences. It's allowing them to face those consequences so they can grow into the person they're meant to be. I'm still Margaret, still 65, still driving my car and managing my own affairs. But now I'm also a woman who learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, even when it means confronting the people you love most. And that lesson, painful as it was to learn, turned out to be the most valuable inheritance I could give my son. If this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. So you'll listen to another tense and emotional story of more brave women out there to inspire you to live as the best you can.